What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Site Visit. We're down here in Rhode Island and we are on site. We're going to talk about what's going on with the footings and foundation. First off, I know you guys are going to say the site's a little bit of a mess. We got formwork kind of everywhere. The guys were nice enough to get back over here right after footings were in and strip everything off so we could waterproof properly. We didn't want to get any of the waterproofing on their formwork, so basically they stripped and left everything in place. They're going to be back just another day or so to come start forming walls, so they'll get this place all cleaned up. But I know you guys are going to comment on it, so I'm just going to address it right off the bat. All our footings are in place. So here in Massachusetts, we have a minimum frost coverage of 4 feet. So back here is actually a walkout basement. I'm actually sitting roughly 4 or 5 feet below the final grade. You can actually see some of the final grade up here. That's going to actually be built up. So these footings back here are actually for our future deck. So if you guys have seen the rendering of the back elevation, we have some steel columns that will come up somewhere around this height, all the way up to our deck that will be on the first level. Like I said, this is a walkout basement. So our walkout basement, our elevation of our wall will be somewhere up here, and then we'll be able to walk into the basement space. Now, here, the biggest thing you'll probably notice is that all of these footings are topped with this black coating. It is a Tremco product, Tremproof 250 GCR. It's a waterproofing product, and we're actually going to use it on the exterior walls of our foundation. Now, if you guys are familiar with foundation work, damp proofing, waterproofing, it's the black coating that is on the outside of the exterior wall, and what that does is prevent any moisture, hydrostatic pressure coming in from the earth through the wall, and thus making the inside of the foundation wall wet. If you think about old foundations, fieldstone foundations, a lot of the times they didn't have a waterproofing membrane, and you get that damp basement feel. New construction, concrete, new homes, it's pretty typical that you're going to have that damp proofing material on the inside, especially when you're below grade. When we're dealing with crawl spaces and things like that, it's not always the case, but we are full foundation here in Rhode Island. But what's atypical here is that we're actually using the waterproofing, this Tremco product, on top of our footings. And I want to talk to you about why we're doing that, and it's due to the capillary action. What is capillary action? Capillary action is when water can travel through the capillaries, or like, I guess by definition it's by like tubes or something like that. But essentially we have our bottom of our footing sitting on soil, and the soil is always going to have, the earth is always going to have moisture in it, and that moisture can get basically absorbed into the concrete. Now, I'm going to have to fact check this. Someone on Instagram said that concrete has a capillary action of 6 miles, which is bonkers, meaning that it can absorb water and water can continue to wick up that far. Someone is obviously going to correct. We should definitely fact check that, but either way, this is only, say 8 inches or so, and that is a lot. That's a lot of moisture that's sitting and that can be translated up into the top of the footing. Well, what's the big deal, Nick? You're going to have a slab on here, and you're going to have a vapor barrier on top of the slab. You're not going to get moisture in the slab. You're absolutely right. We're not going to get moisture in the slab, but we have a concrete wall that comes down and sits in the middle of this footing. Now, if this is getting wet and the moisture is traveling upwards, it's going to then travel in the bottom of this keyway, then translate into the foundation wall, and then continue up. Now, on the outside of this wall, you're going to have that waterproofing, so moisture is not going to make it this way. It's the wicking that we're trying to prevent, the moisture coming up from the ground, getting into the bottom of the wall. Then you're going to have this bottom section of the wall. Even if it wasn't 6 miles, and say if it was 2 feet, you're still going to be able to capture moisture in that wall. So what we're effectively doing is basically building this capillary break, meaning that moisture is going to make its way up to the back side of this, but it's not going to be able to go any further. When we detail this slab, that moisture barrier, that vapor barrier, or that moisture barrier is going to come over. We're going to actually put a bead of sealant here, and then we're going to attach that vapor barrier to the top of this footing, and that's going to give you your continuous barrier to prevent anything from entering into the envelope of the house, because now you have it across the entire footing, and then you have the outside. So once those walls come up too, we're gonna waterproof. We're actually gonna waterproof all the way to the top of foundation. Now, typically you would only waterproof to grade, but in this case we actually have exterior insulation in the entire home, including the wood walls. So on the foundation walls, we're going to be installing rock wool comfort board on the walls all the way up to underside of framing, and then we're going to continue it up in framing. So the reason that we're going to spray the entire wall or roll the entire wall with this Tremco product is because we're going to actually wet set our rock wool comfort board. So as this stuff is being installed, there will be a guy behind him putting this stuff on into the Tremco. So as Tremco dries for waterproofing, it also is holding onto our rock wool, and then eventually you're going to have the earth kind of hold everything up against the foundation walls. But either way, we're preventing that moisture from coming into the wall on the outside, but really we're preventing the moisture wicking by doing the top of the footing. Hopefully that kind of walks you through and gives you the understanding of why we're doing it. Now, some of the questions that came up is, well, what about the connection point between the foundation wall and the footing? The connection point, you know, and someone said that you're going to hurt the bond between this concrete footing and the foundation wall. Well, concrete, when you're placing it at two separate times, you're creating effectively a cold joint, meaning that this concrete is not going to really have a bond to it. There's no real chemical bond because it's placed at different times. They're going to dry at different times. This has already went through a shrink cycle. The walls are going to go through a shrink cycle. So that bond isn't really going to be impacted by having this rubberized coating between it. And that's why we have our rebar, which we have our vertical rebar 16 on center vertical. We'll have 16 on center on the horizontal, but we also have this keyway. And between the two, you know, you're going to have complete positive placement of where that wall is and the connection between the 2 points, or between the wall and the foundation. So you are mechanically fastened to it. These go down and actually turn into the footing. We have rebar down in the footing, and this will continue up all the way to the top of the wall. What we're getting into next, and I think what Brian's got stacked over here, is actually our embeds for our steel. That's exactly what he's got. So we have some massive anchor bolts. The steel guys actually welded these nuts onto them. We have all our plates, our leveling plates and everything. So we're actually going to wet set these. And what the wet set means is we're actually going to be setting these in the concrete. Now, I want to step back a little bit, actually here. When we go about laying this foundation out, it's really important that we're not taking the liability of placing this on the site. This is, you know, has to be zoned correctly. We have to work within our setbacks. So we're actually getting our surveyor on site, and he's locating all of the footings for us. Once those footings were done and we actually had our Tremco, he came back out and he's marked our outside corner of our foundation walls. So now when our foundation guy comes back on site in a day or two, he has exactly where his inside and outside corners are. He can run those walls, he can tie the bar on the inside, he can install the backside, and we're ready to place concrete for our walls. Now, the same thing goes for our wet set anchors. Now, wet set versus dry set. Dry set, we could be drilling these anchors in and epoxying them, but we're choosing to wet set them because, number one, it's a preferred method by the steel guy, but also you don't run the risk of drilling and hitting rebar and dealing with that, dealing with the epoxies. You know, it's one way or the other, it's harder for someone else. And we just feel as though setting them wet set, it makes sense. And we're gonna get our surveyor back on site, and they're gonna locate all of those plates for us so we know they're exactly where they need to be and exactly at the elevation they need to be, and we'll be ready to go for steel. So once we get through the foundation walls, our steel guys are going to set up on site. Steel is in fabrication right now. Steel will be installed, and then we roll right into framing on this project. Guys, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Site Visit. Make sure you guys drop your comments below. Stay tuned for another episode of the NS Builders podcast. We're making some changes on that, so I'm excited to share that. And also stay tuned for another episode of Revealed with Ken, behind the scenes in our cabinet shop.